Welcome to the Franchise Masters podcast, where aspiring entrepreneurs learn what it takes to find, buy, and build successful franchise businesses. My name is Drew Carpenito, and I'm your host as we dive into these fascinating behind-the-scenes stories of people who have used surprising franchises to create massive success. I'm glad you're here. Let's dig in. Welcome to the Franchise Masters podcast. Today we are joined by Brian Alas with Boxwood Partners. Brian brings a really interesting perspective today. He works with he's a broker, just on a much bigger scale than I am, and doing much bigger deals than I will ever do. But Brian, welcome.
Thanks, Drew. Appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to the discussion here today.
Yeah, man. We were just kind of jamming before this, and I think you've got an interesting vantage point with what you guys do. But love to kick it over to you and maybe just introduce Boxwood yourself, kind of how you got into franchising and how you got to this point where you're doing a bunch of deals that everybody's paying attention to.
Yeah, well, appreciate you having me on. Boxwood's a lower middle market M&A advisory firm that has kind of carved out a really nice niche within the franchising network. I've been at Boxwood now going on my 11th year. So kind of been here from the ground up. And we cut our teeth in franchising with a frozen yogurt business back in the day called Sweet Frog. I'm sure down the Charlotte area, we had a bunch of locations back in the day. Went to sell that business and for one reason or another, ended up kind of owning and operating it. We'll leave it at that. So kind of learned franchising from the ground up, everything from, item 19, the FDD, managing franchisee and vendor relationships, kind of across the board with Pat, my colleague, and kind of grew into a love of franchising. We started going to all the conferences. We started getting into the network, so to speak. And what we realized was, hey, we really understand this business, and we're still, primarily an investment bank and M&A advisory firm, even though we're kind of doing that on the side. So our franchising kind of really kicked off with a deal in your neck of the woods called Advantic Lean, which I think you hold near and dear to your heart from previous.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And then quite honestly, been on a stretch ever since. I think we've done over 40 franchise deals in the last 6 years. Franchisee, franchisor, and the franchise services side. So definitely have seen it from a lot of different perspectives. We've seen a lot of different industries. But been doing this for a while and looking forward to kind of the next wave of the next big thing, so to speak.
That's interesting. So you guys operated a franchise system, Sweet Frog, and then
tried to at least.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm sure. But that gave you guys like a good, I'd imagine a good perspective in terms of just like what it takes to operate a franchise system in general, right? And dovetail into what you guys are doing today.
Yeah. And my colleague Pat was actually an operator in a previous life. He was the CEO of a publicly traded company over in London for a number of years before kind of coming to the banking side. So we kind of bring that, the operator experience and then, obviously the expertise in the deal front, where we can really just understand kind of, hey, what is the secret sauce of a brand? What makes them tick? Why is this going to be attractive to investors? Sustainability, trends, et cetera. So that definitely kind of allows us to, I think, be a little bit more savvy on some of the positioning and kind of seeing what a concept could be maybe earlier than some others.
It's fascinating. And you guys do both franchisors, so you sell franchise systems, and then you also do large multi-unit operators as well, help them transact.
Yeah. Big shift in the market over the last couple of years. I think it's been table stakes within the restaurant and fitness world that multi-unit, private equity deals happen. What we're seeing is a switch to the home and commercial services side of things. We're working with a number of franchisees within Neighborly, a couple within Authority Brands, a couple within a Hand and Stone in particular right now as well. I think we're starting to see kind of a shift within the franchisee investing universe that, everyone for a long time said, hey, it's Yum Brands and it's the fitness world and Planet Fitness of the world. But there's no reason now that these systems are starting to mature that you can't invest in Neighborly, Authority, and some of these bigger home and commercial service platforms.
Interesting. So there's basically a shift into the non-food franchise world you're seeing that's getting bigger and bigger.
Kind of like what we saw during COVID, right? I think we saw massive shifts within the non-food into the service franchisor businesses, kind of right around the 2020 timeframe. We've been on a run with a lot of those ever since. I think you're starting to see like, hey, these are great brands. These are great businesses. We love the underlying model. We don't have to buy the franchisor just to be part of a precision garage door or a monster tree service or whatever it may be. You don't have to buy the franchisor. And I think private equity is coming around to that these are just solid underlying businesses and I want to be a part of them.
So is it just kind of like they've been searching for different places to deploy capital and have woken up to, like you said, the underlying fundamentals with a lot of these home service businesses or businesses in the beauty space, whatever it may be, and you start peeling back the onion, you're like, holy moly, like this is an enduring space, good business, not going anywhere. And then and then some franchisees have been able to put together a size business that is attractive to investors.
Right. One of the deals we just announced was Trade's Holy Company, which is a Mr. Rooter, Mr. Electric franchisee up in Columbus, Ohio, Columbus, Cleveland, and Toledo, operating both brands in 3 different locations, and built a really sizable business, and just got down to the underlying blocking and tackling, and had a really good recurring essential break fix, recession resistant, all the things that private equity loves. It was just a franchisee, and that did not deter any sort of interest from private equity in the business. It was a great size, great management team, and the numbers kind of spoke for themselves. So it was a really fantastic opportunity for private equity to get in the system. And a family office out of Missouri actually ended up picking that business up for the same characteristics we just talked about.
So I get a ton of questions. Like I work with folks on the tip of the spear, right? Like a lot of folks just get into franchising. A lot of folks that have, big ambitions where they want to roll something up and scale something to a very large business. Is there, like from the franchisee perspective, who wants to scale something and try to exit to a family office or investors, like, are there certain size thresholds or any kind of thresholds that people typically need to kind of aspire to kind of start thinking about that kind of level of exit?
It's a great question. I would tell you there's something out there for everyone. There's private equity groups, family offices, independent sponsors that'll do something as low as $1 million in EBITDA, which sounds daunting to a new franchisee, I'm sure, on who's listening to this, but that is a daunting, like, hey, that's a lot of territory, a lot of time to kind of get to that. But I would tell you that we're representing concepts that are anywhere from, $4.5 million of EBITDA all the way up to 14. Wow. Our franchisee investments.
Franchisees, not franchisors.
Not franchisors. And it really just depends on the service vertical, right? If you think about Mr. Rooter, Mr. Electric, those are larger average tickets. They have multiple locations, big team. I think it employed 250 plus people in the Ohio region. So there's some really good size out there. And I think, depending on what it is that your goal is and what you want to accomplish, there's kind of a private equity or family office fit for almost all franchisees. It's just, you got to go find it. And again, it all depends on your end goal too. Do you want to be a franchisee who owns the state of Virginia, my home state, in a certain concept? And is it right to bring on private equity sooner so that way you can, have expansion capital, go out and acquire other franchisees, or, buy the territory rights to a western part of the state or whatever it may be. So I do think there's a solution out there for everyone, but I think that magic number is probably 3 million of EBITDA, is kind of where you get the most interest, but that's not to say that you couldn't find it below that.
Random question, but okay, so I'm a franchisee running a business, spending all $3 million in EBITDA. I want to exit, get a family office, get you guys involved. You help me find a family office. Did you notice, were there any quirky things that happened with the franchisor approving a family office that has more of an investor mindset, maybe, to come in and be the actual franchisee in the system?
It's a great question. And I would tell you that the franchisors have been incredibly accommodating, incredibly commercial about how to effectively make this happen, right? Because at the end of the day, I think it's interesting for us, at least right now, is that we're kind of early innings in the services-based side. Planet Fitness has got this down to a science. Yum Brands has this down to a science, but it started with one franchisee, one private equity group, some guardrails, right? If you're a franchisor and you have private equity coming in your system for the first time, you want to have some protections, some discussions about what you can and cannot do. And also, this is going to sound really simple, but making sure that the rest of the portfolio of that private equity group isn't competing with your franchisees.
Right.
And what's the definition of competitive? And how do you set them up for success? And what are available paths of growth? So would tell you that we've had a lot of conversations with the franchisors up front alongside their franchisees, and everyone's been pretty accommodating, but every situation is different and unique. But we all, I mean, the franchisors are excited. Who doesn't want to see your franchisees and top tier franchisees succeeding to the point where they're attracting private equity investment? They're not going to really stand in the way of that.
So that's a little bit like the art of the deal, right? Which is the value that you guys provide to kind of come in and quarterback the whole thing. I would imagine.
Yeah.
So like, is it get you guys
a lot of stakeholders?
Yeah. It's like herding cats with a bunch of egos, I'm sure. But so is it open the discussions early with the franchise company? Like, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm working with Boxwood. They're my partners. They have a track record in franchising, that kind of thing. Is it just, you don't want to lay, so I can't imagine you want to lay this on the franchisor at the last minute of the deal. Hey, by the way, I'm selling you a family office in California.
Well, and listen, I'm not going to bring up, speak ill will of anyone, but there was one that kind of screwed the pooch, so to speak, for the whole industry. The banker that they had hired went out with the wrong royalty rate, assuming that the franchisor was going to grandfather in a concept, or a royalty rate that was historical and legacy to one of the early franchisees that, got all the way to the end of the deal and almost blew it up. So there's a open line of communication. Transparency is key. I think even there's certain franchisors, not to name names, but certain franchisors that actually have a couple of investment banks almost on call, that if you reach out and say, hey, I need some help with this, they're like, great, here's 3 resources and 3 references and make your own decision, but we know all these guys and trust them. But I think there's probably a misconception that, franchisor is not going to play nice in the sandbox and doesn't want that to happen. But I think it's the exact opposite if you do it the right way.
No, I can only imagine. Just helps increase the value of the enterprise, not just for the franchisor, but, it sets a comp too for other franchisees who are aspiring to build larger businesses. And I mean,
no doubt. And the franchisors of the world, typically aren't operating, right? That's not their bread and butter. Their bread and butter is being a franchisor. So having some sophisticated, investors, so to speak, or capital in the system to be the, sometimes the acquirer of choice in a given region, super important for the health of their franchise network too. So they have a lot more reasons to be supportive of this than not.
You mentioned something interesting, like good Zors, they focus on becoming great Zors, right? Which is a completely different element than operating the businesses that they're franchising. But for a young emerging franchise brand that might be using the cash flow of their corporate units to fund the franchise piece of it, like, do you have any words of wisdom for young brands that are on a certain trajectory and they're growing healthily to kind of think about when it might be time to transition out of the game and operating their businesses and focus on being a franchisor exclusively?
It's hard to say. I mean, every brand's different. I tell you that almost all of the brands we represented over the last couple of years, I want to say 80% have had corporately owned units, spanning, from a single territory, single location up to, 15 or 20 in multi-unit stuff. We've seen those corporate store portfolios. They're not a negative. I actually think that gives you a lot more credibility with your franchisee base because you're on the front lines. You're knowing how to operate these things. You've been there before. When you make that switch, entirely up to kind of, the brand itself. But we typically see that the franchise or side typically comes to light, in and around kind of 20 locations. And you start to see the shift because it's exponential from there, right? You're seeing it go from, 20 to 100 units. It takes a lot less time from going from one corporate location to 3. Yeah. If you have the right friend dev function and hire guys like yourself to facilitate that, there's exponential growth and you have a path to that, what we consider to be royalty sufficient, where you're running the Zor without, dipping in the friend dev funds or leaning on the corporate location to provide that cash flow.
So for a young emerging brand, that royalty self-sufficiency point, that's kind of the major inflection point to strive to, right? Like the first mountaintop to get to.
And I think I can't remember, it's in the friend data survey a couple of years ago, but I think it's less than 10% of brands get to 100 units.
Yeah, it's like 16%. I was just looking at the other day.
It might be a little higher now, but I think that's in everyone's head, you get to 100 units, right? Regardless of whether your average unit volume is, 450 or 5 million. Like that's a huge kind of milestone within the growth of a franchise business. And typically you're going to get to royalty subscription at that point in time too.
Yeah. 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 That for whatever reason, that's always the magic number that gets thrown around, is that 100 unit mark.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you guys have been doing deals for how long in the franchise space?
I mean, we've been doing deals in the franchise space for, 8 or 9 years. But I mean, we've definitely had a really good run for the last 4 or 5, to say the least. And knock on wood, hopefully it continues.
What was it that kind of like awoke this investor money, private equity, family offices to the world of franchising?
I think there's always been one concept per sector, right? I mean, if you think about young brands, now it's table stakes for us, but 30 years ago, it wasn't. I think Planet Fitness took off and was kind of the next, arguably the next big thing within franchising that not only been super successful, but has had, a tremendous amount of success. And I think you see it a lot in restaurants, you see it a lot in fitness, but I think in the services side, we're kind of still in that infancy. So for us, it was really that the same underlying characteristics of why you like franchise brands exist in a lot of different business models. And people are starting to realize that. And I think arguably the service-based businesses are easier to scale. A lot of multi-unit franchisees that don't have to worry about real estate, and it's investments in people and trucks and equipment that is a lot easier to bring that owner operator in the system versus, sophisticated capital that needs, we're not building boxes for, $1.5 million, right, on Planet Fitness to kind of get something off the ground. This could be, you and a truck and 2 other employees and starting to build your empire, one service call at a time.
People think I'm crazy when I say like, hey, like there's these lower investment, non-brick and mortar based businesses that can scale to be bigger than Planet Fitness franchisees, bigger than Orange Theory franchisees. And they scale a hell of a lot more efficiently, like you said, because you don't have to deal with the whole real estate piece. And they look at me like I'm crazy. So I'm glad you're talking about some of the examples of these not very sexy looking businesses. You're like, dude, I don't have a background in electricity or, being an electrician or plumbing or whatever it may be, but that's not what it takes to scale something, right? It's the business fundamentals of people and marketing and advertising and leadership.
Look no further than one of our more recent clients in Stretch Zone, right? I mean, albeit it's a real estate-based business, you need less than 1,500 square feet to put together 5 tables. Variable cost business model, low build-out cost with assisted stretching. It's a great concept. And it's part of that, what we think is that new health and wellness trend. I think one thing you're going to see from us in the next 12 to 18 months is a lot more of that personal care, health and wellness phase. And I think attitudes and health and wellness coming out of COVID have changed substantially. And I think people are focusing more on it. And I think the millennials and Gen Z generations are, obviously spending more time and attention to it. So it's definitely one that, on the surface, you would say, hey, is that a franchise brand you want to own? And then you get into the unit level economics of owning, 7 or 8 stretch zones. And you're like, wow, this is a tremendous business model with, great margin profile. And a lot of franchisees are having success.
And the counterpoint to that, a lot of times when people hear about it, not having the perspective that you or I have, or being inside the world of franchising, like, that's a fad. Isn't that a fad? Then I feel like it's just going to come and go and, be gone. But like stretching's been an interesting example of this space, right? Because you got Stretch Zone, you got Stretch Lab, right? They're both kind of a little bit of a arms race going on there. But stretching wasn't new, right? Like we all knew stretching was good for our bodies. It just hadn't been mainstreamed or commercialized in a way that both Stretch Zone and Stretch Lab have taken it to market.
Right. But it's an awareness thing. I think same concept with junk, right? We've done the junk. We did Junk Luggers. We did Junk King. There's been a couple of different other ones that we're talking to as well, but the junk space is all about awareness. I guarantee that most of the boomers, no disrespect to that generation, but most people, they think of it as, oh, I got to go to the dump today. I got to go pay and I got to lug all my stuff. I'm going to borrow, John's truck and I'm going to load it up and I'm going to go to the dump and get rid of all this stuff. But for $300, someone comes to your house and says, hey, oh, you need that gone? I'll be done in 10 minutes. I think it's an awareness thing there too. I think we've seen that. It's just that people probably didn't appreciate that service even existed. Another concept that probably no one ever thought of is duty calls. which is on my
that's for
authority.
sure. Oh yeah. You guys did that deal?
We did. So Jacob, the founder, is based up in Charlottesville, not too far away from us. But we kind of got a hold of that deal, and we said, "Wow, this is an unbelievable business model." And Rob Weddle and the team at Authority thought the same and said, "We need to own this too. This is a great business." But picking up, I don't want to
pet waste is the political term, I believe. Pet waste.
Yes, pet waste in your backyard for $20 a week. You wouldn't think it's a business model, off the top of your head, but you get into it and you're like, wow, this is another great business model that doesn't require a lot of capital. It's one person in a truck and proper training. And honestly, it's a marketing game, right? As soon as people find out about it, they're like, I'm never getting rid of the service. So it's
like revenue, right?
Yeah. Well, the whole economy that we're playing off of right now is that do it for me economy.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think is different than previous generations and really at the forefront of a lot of these macro trends.
Yeah, because it seems like the millennials are becoming a bigger and bigger percentage of homeowners out there, and they're a totally different consumer than you and then our parents coming up, right? Like generally they're not the DIYers. They're just used to outsourcing everything.
Well, and I think our generation too is a lot more dual income households. So it's opportunity cost of time at that point. And what can you do versus what you can't. And, this isn't a sob story, but we went through the 2001 and then the great financial crisis within a span of 10 years in our generation. And I would say most people were underemployed during that time. Didn't have a job that they wanted to be in, kind of had maybe career was set back a few years to kind of get into the flow of what they should have been doing. And, those are some prime earning years that, you're probably 4 or 5 years behind. So as you said, most of the millennial generation really hasn't bought their first home yet. That's wild to think about in the construct of what's going to happen over the next 10 or 15 years. And why you're seeing companies like, even though it's not franchised, but a company like Valet Living, which was doing all commercial services for multi-unit apartments, same services that we would do for the home, but you do for the apartment complex. A lot of the franchisors we're working with that have national or regional accounts are starting to focus their time and attention on that because you have a lot of millennials that are still in apartments complexes left and right.
So like the trash pickup, like taking people's trash out, stuff like that.
Yep.
Valet Living, huh? I hadn't heard that yet.
Much bigger business. It traded a couple of years ago. Trash butlers out there doing their thing. I think the junk business, like I said, both Junk King and Junk Luggers had a really good national account program that, is because of the flexibility of the franchise model and how much coverage they have across the country made total sense. And I think you're starting to see, even some of the restoration businesses we've done in the past had really good national account programs or even regional, like think hospitals, school systems, being on call, being that preferred provider in a certain region. Those are high cash flow, reoccurring, maybe not recurring, but reoccurring revenue streams for your franchisee base. And that's the power of the franchisor at times, being able to kind of leverage that once you have the footprint.
Yeah. So good franchisors are paying attention to that next level of strategic growth is going after leveraging the base that they have in terms of getting the units out there and the coverage out there, and then figuring out what kind of accounts they can go after to then push the revenue down to the franchisees. Right. Yeah. We did that at Atlantic Lane. It was fun. It was an interesting balance because it's got to be good work, right? Because you start getting negotiated down pretty heavy on margins at that point, but then the zeros get a lot bigger really quickly. But there was always the balance of making sure it was good, profitable work for the franchisees, and they understood what kind of work it was. It's not the full blown high margin self-generated work that you're getting locally, but it could. I mean, some of the accounts that we were able to get open were very big.
And in certain businesses where there's seasonality, it's awesome, right? To not have to work for a lead and you get a phone call that, hey, your job's at 2:00 on a Tuesday, once a quarter, and I need you to pick up, junk at XYZ department store and take down their end cap. So it's highly predictable, recurring work for your franchisees that, really kind of maybe buffers, some of that labor in slow periods.
No doubt about it. And it's work you wouldn't have otherwise gotten. Somebody's going to go do it. Right. All right. So switching gears a little bit to the franchisors, like what are some of the things of the deals that, some of the maybe the easier deals that you've seen that like, what are some of the things that really, really good franchise companies that have a really good transaction? Like what are they paying attention to? Like what are their characteristics? Or what are some of the things that stand out to you as you look back? Because you're inside these companies helping sizing them up before you take them to market. Like what are some of the things, like if I'm a young emerging franchise, or what are some of the things that I can listen to what you're about to tell me right now that's going to help shape the future of my company?
I heard this from a number of franchisors, but it's treat your franchisees like customers. They are your true customers. And I think that is what it all kind of comes back to, because the one thing that investors look for is unit level economics. Are your franchisees making money? How healthy is the system? And I think the good franchisors have done a really good job of focusing all of their kind of strategic decision making. I'll call it the true north of the brand is to make your franchisee successful. And the franchisors that have done that and really kind of have a relentless focus on that are the ones that, quite honestly, have done the best. Outside of the proverbial, great people, and I do think that up and down our client list, there are management teams that are 2 people and all the way to 8 people, and that senior team doesn't always look the same, but they all have great people. Yeah. But everyone kind of comes back to, hey, how are the franchisees doing? And are we giving them the tools for success? And I think if you're an emerging ZOR, kind of really focusing on that, your franchisees as customers is probably the biggest thing that we've seen kind of throughout that's common ground across all these franchisors.
Yeah, it was just, as you were talking, I was just thinking, I'm like, if I'm a prospective franchisee, and that's part of the beauty of the franchise disclosure document of franchising is you can get some of the same information that you guys get, having access to it from the inside when you're getting ready to kind of help a company transact. But I mean, if you know how to read an FDD and you know how to validate with existing franchise owners, like you can do the same due diligence on a smaller scale that a big private equity company is going to do if they're trying to buy the whole franchise system. And it's
funny. It's one of the last things to do that private equity groups will do before they end up buying a business is like the last week they will do franchisee validation. They will call franchisees and sometimes it's on a no names basis. Sometimes it's straight up and kind of do those validation calls, but you're totally right. That validation's key. I'll go back to one thing maybe I left out though. The franchisor, at the end of the day, the franchisor has the ultimate decision whether or not to let a franchisee into their network.
Good point.
And what they were really good at, outside of unit level economics program with customers is that vetting process is super important, and they have to be aligned with the vision and the goals that you have as an organization, as a franchisor. And, some systems will have difficulty with that. And some do it better than others, but that is, it's probably one thing we overlook, but that's probably the first step in a great franchisor is great people and great franchisees. I will say one piece of advice on that is like, a lot of franchisors are like, oh my God, I got to find my first franchisee. I got to give away, royalty rates. I got to give away territory. No, just stay who you are. Stay true to the brand. You have an FDD for a reason. If your brand gets to that point, it's going to be worth everything and more, and just treat them like a customer, but don't give exceptions and cut corners for those first couple of franchisees. Cause I think, they're always going to come back looking for more too.
Yeah. So what's your take on this question? So young franchise brands, you get the FSOs, like there's some things out there that young brands have probably been able to use to accelerate their growth versus the tried and true way, compared to the idea of like the crawl, walk, run approach, which would be like, hey, start small, like franchise to a couple people, customers, friends and family, whatever it is, work through the kinks because shit's going to break when you start to franchise. You don't know where, you don't know how, it's going to break. Get a foundation, spend a year and a half helping those first handful of franchisees be successful. And maybe you might have one, you might need to exit out, gently or whatever it is, but like get a good foundation to grow on top of, compared to the strategy of screw it. We've got 3 corporate locations and 2 franchisees that have been open for 3 months. Let's just go. Let's go national. Like any advice for young brands in looking at either 2 of those approaches?
I think a lot of the people that have a couple locations and say, boom, let's go national, let's hire an FSO and go that route early on. more often than not, this isn't their first franchisor. I think there's a lot of experience within franchising, and if you do it once, you typically try to do it again. So there's a lot of people who know the game. And I'm talking to the audience. This is first time franchising, right? A lot of people know the game and been around this for a long time and know what's best for them. I think, slow and steady for the first, like I said, 0 to 20 units, super important. Making sure that your franchisees are making money, the franchisor is building out, infrastructure, support systems, focus on digital marketing, whatever it may be in terms of kind of getting you ready. But you're going to know when you're ready. And I think it all depends on the model, right? If it's a multi-site, multi-unit concept, maybe it makes more sense to have a, deep relationship with the broker network or even work with an FSO. If it's an owner-operated business model, maybe it's a little bit, slower growth, but it's more organic and you're going to have the right people in the system. So I don't want to say there's a cookie cutter answer for everyone, but, early on, focus on your current franchisees. And I think it'll be pretty apparent when you're ready to take that next step in growth. But no matter if you hire a broker or hire an FSO and whatever it may be, you always have internal fran devs. So making sure that is a core strategy and core tenet of your business model is really important too.
Yeah, no, well said. Well said. So what does it look like when a company or a franchisee who's, large multi-unit franchisee who's thinking about exiting or a franchise company that's thinking about transacting, like what does it look like to work with Boxwood? What's your guys' process look like?
Sounds cliche, but we play a lot of defense to play a lot of offense. We do a lot of work up front. I think there's a lot of upfront work, whether it be the quality of earnings with an accounting firm, whether it be our internal diligence process that we do with a brand before we take it to market, understanding the underlying data. I think that's probably one thing people don't appreciate is that even at the franchisor level, we're looking for trends within the franchisee base on a, sales by store by location, making sure that we understand what's driving the revenue growth, what's driving the economics of the business. So we do a lot of work up front. It can take us, as little as a month to 2.5 months to get the financials in order. I mean, there's two things that there's two things we see across franchising no matter what. One is the data is probably not as good as everyone thinks it is in terms of the things that we need to kind of run our process. And from an accounting standpoint, usually the books are put together, but probably not in the way that we look at them. In terms of whether it be pro forma adjustments or EBITDA adjustments and right-sizing the business from a cost perspective. There's a lot of work that goes into that up front. And listen, it's not a negative. For the most part, this is the first time that a founder or family is going through a process. You don't know what you don't know. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like we could jump in and run a franchise tomorrow either. But there's a lot of work that goes into that up front to kind of get ready for a process. And once, we're ready to kind of take it to market, we have run processes with as little as 5 buyers all the way to 250 buyers. Really depends on the asset. What's the goal of the transaction? Not everyone is looking for the last dollar. A lot of our founders end up, rolling over and remaining part of the cap table. So more often than not, in a founder-owned business, it's usually the second highest price that wins. Because at some point, it's not about the money, it's about your partner and what the vision for the company is going forward. So there's a lot of work that goes in up front, and kind of hear us say it on our side, but we trust the process a little bit. I know it's a hard thing to do for a lot of founder entrepreneurs who have been really, really successful in their own right, to trust the guys at Boxwood who are on the other end of the phone who look like we could be most of their kids, but ready to kind of go through a process and kind of just recognizing there's a lot of context around everything that we do.
So you mentioned that the second highest price usually wins. Why is that?
Well, I would say tie goes to the runner. They use a baseball adage, right? But if you had 2 buyers at $100, and you were expecting 90, you're going to pick the guys you like versus the guys that stretch to go to 100 and 300 and 4. Now I'm not going to take words out of anyone's mouth. There's a lot of people out there who go for highest price.
Yeah.
But at some point in time, right, if you're getting into the point where this is a big liquidity event for you and your family, and you got people around the table that are good employees who've been with you since day one, you want to make sure that everyone's aligned as to who you're going with and who you're picking in a partner. And I think that's probably one of the bigger misconceptions is there's always highest price. And there's always, a quantitative reason as to why a deal got done. And there's a lot of reasons from a qualitative perspective that deals get done that, the press releases that we put out, and the sound bites you read in Franchise Times really can't kind of encapsulate or capture the, what truly was the reason for that deal and why this person or this investor in particular is a super, strategic fit for this buyer in this business.
Yeah. I'd love to talk examples, but I know you're not going to give me any. So,
I wish, well, I mean, here's a great example. I think this is highly relevant and not Princeton Equity Partners. They have Dave Crisali, the former founder of Massage Envy, as an operating partner and advisor to their businesses. When it came to Stretch Zone, it turned out that, he had known Jordan from his time at Massage Envy. And he said, I understand this business model left, inside and out, and this is a great fit for us, and we'd love to be investors. That's one, that was a trump card that they had that no one else had. So there's a differentiation part of their deal and their value proposition to, Tony and Jordan that I think, definitely made an impact in how they viewed valuation and viewed, competing offers. Now, that's not to say that's going to happen on every deal. Right. One to kind of example is like, hey, who can you bring to the table to help us grow? And Dave obviously has some very relevant and meaningful multi-unit experience within health and wellness.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, it's not all about the money.
No, there's just a lot more to these deals than and I would say not every $100 million offer is also created equal. Outside of the structure. Well, in terms of how deal structures, what type of security people are putting into it, how much rollover they're requiring. There's a lot of nuances to deals that, I think founders, entrepreneurs always fall in love with the headline price. And sometimes it really is way more about the qualitative terms of that price than the actual price itself. And I think that's, we could talk for 4 hours on that. But that's definitely something where we obviously have a ton of reps, a ton of data. The good part is we have buyer behavior too. We've seen a lot of these buyers in multiple processes over the years and know what they can and cannot do, so to speak.
Fascinating. So you're seeing the appetite for investor level money coming into franchising. Is it slowing down, cooling off, continuing to grow?
Accelerating.
Really?
I mean, knock on wood. I mean, we're seeing tremendous pipeline of opportunities within our pipeline. I think more broadly too. Up and down, our counterparts at, call it a North Point or Harris Williams, Lazard. Everyone's seeing great deal flow within the franchise space. And I think there's, a scarcity of assets at certain size levels, right? If you get the big franchisors, a lot of them have traded, but there's a lot of fragmentation, a lot of up and coming brands that are, called sub 10 million of EBITDA that, are actively looking for private equity partners to help them grow. And we've been we're stuck in the cross currents there.
You guys have done a lot of putting yourselves in the cross currents.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. But yeah, we're definitely seeing a lot of, I got off a call just now from another private equity firm who's, lost on 2 franchisee deals in the last 60 days and desperately wants to get into one. So we're trying to find some concepts and get them in the pipeline here.
Franchisees. They want to become a franchisee?
Yep.
Wow. I'm so jazzed up by the level of activity you're starting to see with large multi-unit franchisees bringing in institutional level money. That's on the non-food side. That is exciting on a number of levels.
And I think the consolidation is going to continue, right? And I think, you think about solo salons, right? Christina and now owned by TSG, they may buy a couple of personal care franchises at some point. Imagine that if you're a solo franchisee and they acquire something else, having some white space in your territory to add on 2 or 3 other different types of brands to accelerate your own portfolio. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities like that. Again, it seems like a foreign concept today, but then you just watch us do it in Neighborly with Mr. Rooter, Mr. Electric. And if Neighborly bought another concept that had white space in the Ohio area, all you have to do is one phone call away and you're in this model. I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities abound within the franchisee world that we're pretty excited about. And it'll be interesting to see, how these things continue to perform. But if Yum Brands and Planet Fitness are any indication of how successful franchisees can be, we're pretty bullish on that.
Love it. Well, Brian, thanks, man, for dropping on here and you covered a lot of stuff in a short amount of time. But for anybody listening, there's a lot of nuggets in here to take away. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, how can they reach out to you?
Feel free to tag me on LinkedIn and then shoot me a message or my email is on our website. So happy to talk to whoever.
Awesome. Brian, thanks, man. I'll let you roll.
Thanks for having me on, Drew. Really appreciate it, man. We'll talk to you soon.
That's a wrap. Hope you found a nugget or two in there that can help you on your franchise journey. And if you ever want to talk franchising, reach out to me anytime.